Hey, what's up everyone? Mendel here. I hope you're all doing awesome and wonderful. So, a couple months ago, I think a couple months ago or a month ago, anyway, a while ago, STL Tones released a plugin called the Josh Middleton Tonality, which is based off his three favorite amps: the dual rectifier, the PEAVEY XXX, and a Fishman 50 block letter, if I'm correct. Now, since by coincidence these amps were circling around in my studio, I thought it would be fun to compare the real amps, the real tube amps, versus the same amps in the plugin. And that's what I did. I just want to say, before we dive in, take all of this with a grain of salt, because even the same amp from the same brand, same amp, could have the same tubes and it could sound different. Or perhaps different brands of power tubes or preamp tubes like the 12X7 could sound slightly different or a big difference. You know the drill. Like, same amp next to each other could sound different, let alone from plugin format. His perhaps modded amps could sound totally different than the amps I have here. So again, take all this with a grain of salt, but I think it would be fun to make a comparison. So let's dive in. Here we go. All right, so here we are in Cubase. By the way, I'm not sure if you can see my buddy WD over there in the back. He's just hanging out here. And he brought this 5150 amp. I thought, while it's here, let's make this cool video of comparing these amp versus the STL Tonality Josh Middleton. So as you can see over here, I have the plugin, which is also based on a block letter, if I'm correct. Over here we have the Fishman 50 block letter EVH. Over here you can see. So I did some level matching, and over here I have the Fishman 50. And over here I have the plugin. So let's first listen to the real amp, and then I'll switch back and forth with the plugin. Right from the get-go, I can tell the real amp is a bit more warmer, has a bit more mids. The Josh Middleton one sounds a bit more scooped, and I think it might fit in the mix better right away. But we'll check about that later. Okay, so let's dial in the real amp so it becomes a bit more closer to the plugin. All right, so I think that's pretty close. Ready?
Yeah.
I think that's pretty close. Let me just check again. There's a certain, I don't know, certain attack slash mid focus which I prefer on the real amp, actually, and I have a bit of a hard time to get that mid close to the plugin. Yeah, no, I can definitely tell. In a blind test, I wouldn't be able to tell a difference, at least on this amp. So settings wise, I just cut out a tiny bit more mids. So with the plugin everything at 12 on the amp, I have lows between 5 and 6, mids close to 4, number 4, highs close to number 6, post gain is the same, the pre-gain is the same, and resonance is still at 12. I did put the presence almost between 5 and 6, leading more a bit towards 5. That's really close. And even though I'm using my favorite load box, the driftwood load box, which in my opinion brings the best out of the amp, with this I would say just get the plugin and use that to your mixes, because this is so close. Yeah, there's a certain mid, like a mid that could be pleasant for some people. I'm not a big fan of it on this, but there's some mid on the real amp that I'm thinking I want to scoop out some more mids, but that could also be because the Josh Middleton one is like modified, if I'm correct. So I do notice one thing, that both amps are really close, but there's a certain top end on the real amp that's not there on the plugin. The real amp sounds a bit more neutral and pleasant to the ears on the high end, and the plugin is a tiny bit harsh. Let's just loop that chord. So let's just dial in how I really like the amp sounding. This should be good. And let's get the plugin close to that. That's still really close. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the Josh Middleton to the different tracks. I'm going to reamp 4 rhythm tracks, and then we're going to compare them like in the mix and solo back to back. All right, so I'm done reamping here. Over here we have the reamped Fishman 150 block later next to me. And here are the DI tracks running straight into the Josh Middleton plugin. All right, starting with the real amp. So overall, I think I prefer the real amp. It sounds a bit more smoother across the upper mids. But I mean, we're talking about like grains of sand here. This is like so close in my opinion. Let's listen to both of them back and forth soloed. So starting with the real amp again. I think there's some presence lacking. Let's just double check. So I added some presence around 8.61 kilohertz, some lift there on the EQ, and now it sounds even closer, I think. So starting with the real amp, so that EQ is done on the Josh Middleton. I mean, if this is the difference between a real amp and a plugin with the flexibility of using a plugin in the mix or just jamming through some monitors, I'd say definitely go for the plugin. That's just my 2 cents. Let's just quickly check that other riff, or let's first check this one in the mix again with the EQ. Super close. So let's check that second riff. I would say just get the plugin and don't spend. So hoeveel was die versterking in reverb?
2000 euro.
So there are some Fishman 50 block letters that are going now on reverb for 2,000 euros, or perhaps a bit less or a bit more. But if you can get a plugin for, I don't know how much plugin is, I think 150 euros or something, you get 3 amps. I mean, this should be a no-brainer. So soloed. I mean, soloed, I can tell the real amp, there's a certain high-end smoothness which sounds very pleasant to the ears, which is not there on the plugin, but that's so marginal that I would even doubt mentioning it. Alright, so let's go to the second amp. Alright, so now we're at the second amp, the PEAVEY XXX. So I have it loaded up here on StudioLogic Tonality Josh Middleton. And over here I have a real PEAVEY XXX. Now again, like I said at the beginning, take this whole thing with a grain of salt, because I don't know what tubes they use, but in this one got freshly retubed. These are, of course, 12AX7s in the preamp and EL34s in the power amp. So it could be they use 606s, and there could be a difference. Overall, don't kill me for it. Overall, I don't think there's a very big difference between 606s and EL34s, but that's just my, well, basically my experience. I won't say my opinion, but that's what I've experienced so far. And on both amps, I have the damping on loose. Okay, so starting with the real amp, and while it's playing, I'll switch to the plugin. It's very, very good. There's a certain upper mid-range that I really like, but overall that low-end thickness that's on the real amp, maybe it's also because of the driftwood load box that changes the amp a tiny bit. But in this test so far, it should take with a grain of salt. I prefer the real amp. Let's go to a different riff. It's a bit more scratchy, but there's one thing that I really notice now, which is there's a certain oomph or movement during the palm mutes, which is more present on the real amp than on the plugin. is a bit squashy, but I have to say the upper mid sounds killer on this plugin. That's really cool. Now let's see how they react if we do the same settings on the amp. So adding a bit of high end, taking out a tiny bit of mids, add some bottom. Let's do the same thing on the amp. That seems about right. Here we go. And now the plugin becomes a bit scratchy. Let's try the same thing on a different riff. Yeah, still has that bit of a scratchy thing. Okay, so now let's try to get the plugin as close as possible to the real amp with these settings. No, it's pretty tough. It's hard to get them really close. I think that's fairly close. The bottom just reacts, it feels like it reacts a bit differently than the real amp. Like when I turn the bottom knob, but on the plugin, it feels like it doesn't add that like below 50 Hertz low end, like resonance. Okay, let's just reamp these settings on this riff and compare them. All right, so in the mix, let's first start with the plugin. Now the real amp. And now soloed. Yeah, overall, the plugin is really, really good. Work with any mix, and I can definitely tell you if someone would, well, probably people already mixed with this, they would say it's a real and people would believe it. But now back to back, I personally prefer like the hugeness, like the big balls of the real amp. All right, so now let's go to the dual rectifier. All right, and here we are at the final third amp, the MESA dual rectifier. So over here you can see on Josh Middleton Tonality as a dual rectifier, and over here next to me we have the dual rectifier as well. Now with this, I could say you can probably take the biggest grain of salt ever, because throughout the years MESAs have been sounding different. I don't know which MESA Josh had. I don't know which power tubes he used. On this one we have EL34s in here. That's the only one I have available at the moment. And I think probably they use 606s, but still, like I said, take this with a grain of salt, but I think it still could be a fun comparison to see how close they are with everything at noon, and perhaps how close we can get them to each other. So without further ado, I have on both amps everything at 12. Only thing that's at 9 o'clock is the master volume, and on both amps I'm at the second channel. Even though this one looks kind of more reddish than orange, but still. Okay, so starting with the amp. Now that there's a bit more brightness on the plugin, or a bit darker on the real amp, but I have to say, besides that, it's really, really close. It has that typical MESA sound. Again, amp. Yeah, so definitely brighter on the plugin. It feels there's a bit more low end on the real amp, but I'm curious how the gain would be different. So I'm just gonna put the gain at 3 o'clock, just like so. Put the same thing on the MESA here. And you know what? Let's take a bit of bass away, a bit of scooping, a bit more high end, and a bit more presence. Same thing on the real amp here. That should be about right. Now let's compare them again. Here we go. I think with this is the case, I think it's just that his MESA is just so different from this one that it's not even like a digital versus real amp thing, because this really sounds like the MESA, and I've been playing through this plugin a couple times past months, and it feels like this amp. So I love that. So let's try to get this close to the real amp. I think that's pretty close. Yeah, the curves feel a bit different, but I think that's mainly because it's a different amp. So let's go to the modern channel. So real amp. So again, the real amp is darker. The plugin has more top end. I think I prefer that even, because that's what I love in the mix, the bright tone. And I would need to do less tweaking on the plugin to get more brightness to it. So that's, I think with this, I prefer the plugin so far. All right, so now let's just dial in a good tone on the amp. Try to match that with the plugin, and then reamp for rhythm guitars. Alright, now try to mess with the plugin. There's a certain thing that on the high that's really different between these two amps, but I think this is as close as I can get it for now. Okay, so let's just reamp these for rhythm tracks. Alright, so I'll play the riff and then go back and forth between the reamped real amp, and the plugin running live. So here we go. So it feels to me that the real amp has a certain balls width and a mid-range, so I'm gonna try to add some mids to the plugin. Well, I'm listening to it now. Like adding just a lot of mids here. 8.7. Alright, so final check. And now soloed. I think with some tweaking you could get it closer to the real thing. Okay, so now with everything at 12, let's take a listen. Alright, so now with everything at 12, let's take a listen. So the plugin is more mid-focused, which cuts better through the mix, in my opinion. But I do think when I dial in the amp, I prefer the real amp. But having said that, when mixing with the flexibility of this plugin, you could say it's a no-brainer that the plugin wins for that. But for the feel and drive of the song, especially this riff, I think I prefer when it's dialed in, the real amp. But that's just me. All right, so that's it. That's the amp comparison. Again, take all this with a grain of salt because all amps, even from the same manufacturer, even from the same year, could sound different. So, hope you liked this video. If you did, please give me a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the belly thing. That's much appreciated. See you next time, all right? Cheers.